Good evening. It's Wednesday. It's 7:30 p.m. That must mean only one thing. Shakespeare Hour Live! Good evening and welcome. My name is Simon Godwin and I am the Artistic Director of the Shakespeare Theatre Company in Washington, D.C., broadcasting to you live from Rectortown Methodist Chapel here at the community hall where the internet is helping me out. Well, before I introduce our panelists tonight, I would like to thank my dear friends and sponsors of tonight's episode, Carol and Landon Butler. Thank you. Shakespeare Hour is produced as part of our larger artistic initiative, Shakespeare Everywhere, which is generously supported by the Beach Street Foundation. Thank you as well to them. Now let me introduce our terrific panelists this evening. Tonight, we are joined by Academy Award winner and Will awardee, F. Murray Abraham, who played Shylock at Theatre for a New Audience in New York. Murray, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. And we did it in Stratford-on-Avon too. Don't forget that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Murray, may I ask where you are this evening?
I am in Manhattan on Lower Fifth Avenue where the protests are marching constantly.
Wow. So a scene of some drama.
Yeah, it's a demonstration of the other making itself known. Okay,
an excellent segue into one of tonight's themes. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And thanks for being with us tonight. It means so much. Thank you. My next guest is Jeffrey Horowitz, founding artistic director of Theatre for a New Audience and my dear friend. Jeffrey, are you there?
I'm here, Simon. Hi.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi.
Are you also in New York?
I'm in Brooklyn, Simon, and I'm also at an epicenter of protest. I'm in my apartment on Ashland Place and Lafayette, and I'm hearing and seeing everything.
Goodness. Okay. Okay, good. So again, very much in the heat of the moment. Well, welcome to the show, Jeffrey.
Thank you. And
finally, I would like to introduce Kate McCluggage, who played Portia in the same Tofana production. So it's a bit of a reunion. Hello, Kate, how are you?
Hello, Simon. I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. What a beautiful backdrop you have.
Yes, I figured it was appropriately artistic, but not too distracting. I don't know.
I think that's absolutely right. And no, I think you're not in New York this evening. Where are you?
I'm not. I'm in the epicenter of the growing coronavirus epidemic. I'm in Florida, where we've had more cases in the last few days than anywhere else in the United States.
Oh my goodness. Okay. An unfortunate milestone. Well, thank you as well, Kate, for being with us. Well, as you can tell, we've got wonderful artists from Tofana joining us this evening, and we also have many Theatre for New Audience subscribers and patrons also listening and tuning in, so a special welcome to them as well. So let me turn over now to my co-host and colleague, Drew Lichtenberg, my co-host and, of course, Shakespeare Theatre Company's resident dramaturg. Drew, good evening.
Good evening, Simon. How are you?
I'm well. I'm excited about tonight. I'm raring to go.
Well, me too. Before we get started, I can tell that everyone is sort of champing at the bit. I just want to remind everyone tuning in and those of you who are first-time viewers about a few special features of this webinar. There is a Q&A button if you want to ask any of us questions, hopefully about the Merchant of Venice. And there's also a chat button if you want to share general observations with everyone else who's tuning in. So please, we've had a great time with all the questions that have come in. If we don't get to them tonight, we will be responding to them in our newsletter that goes out on Friday. So keep the questions coming. We love it when there is active and lively engagement. The theme of tonight, as F. Murray mentioned, is the insider and the outsider. We are discussing The Merchant of Venice, which in some ways makes a nice pair with last week's topic, the play Othello. These are both Venetian plays. These are both Shakespeare's portraits or studies of people who are defined by their relationship to the dominant hegemonic society of Venice, which was a republic, not a monarchy, which meant that theoretically, at least, anyone could become a citizen. And The Merchant of Venice it's a little bit of a struggle for me personally because I have Jewish heritage. It's also, I think today, considered one of the most controversial of Shakespeare's plays. I know ever since we announced that we were planning on doing it next season, Simon and I have received a lot of feedback from patrons saying, how could you do The Merchant of Venice? This is a hateful play, this is a prejudicial play. And hopefully tonight we can start to answer that question, because in my opinion, it is also an anti-hate play, or it is a play that is deeply human. For those of you who don't remember the play very well, quick refresher, this was probably written around 1596 or 1597. So just after Midsummer Night's Dream, just before Henry IV, Part 1. If you can imagine a playwright creating Bottom the Weaver, Shylock, and Falstaff all in short succession, that's what he did. And it's a play about many things, but mostly it's about money. The plot concerns a young nobleman or a young gentleman, meaning he's Gentile, named Bassanio, who's deeply in debt and wants to impress Portia, who is a wealthy heiress in Belmont, which is close to Venice. So he borrows money from his friend Antonio, who is a melancholy merchant, also a bachelor. It's not quite ever explained in the play. And Antonio borrows money from a Jewish moneylender or usurer named Shylock. And Shylock's deal is that he wants a pound of flesh if Antonio is unable to repay him. The other plot in the play concerns Shylock's daughter, Jessica, who runs off with another gentle Christian Venetian named Lorenzo. So it's sort of a comedy, it's sort of a problem play, and it could also be read as a sort of tragedy. It's a very ambiguous, ironic play, and the theme of our discussion tonight is the outsider and the insider. Our question is, how does Shakespeare depict the social outsider in the play? And how does he depict those who are members of the inside group? We'd like to start off with sort of an introduction to this question from Jeffrey. Jeffrey Horowitz, you are up.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Drew. So just as a context for the play, I think it's useful to know that the Jews were deported from England in 1290. So you weren't allowed to be Jewish. So that's the first thing. As a context for seeing the play. And in terms of thinking about this question about the outsider and the insider, I think, first of all, I want to say that the play has the structure of a fairy tale. It's called a comedy. Comedies end in marriage. This play is going to end in 3 marriages. And the 3 marriages are highly problematical, all 3. So it seems like a comedy, but it's not going to be a comedy in the sense that we're all going to laugh. And very importantly, as you begin to say, well, who's the outsider, who's the insider? I look at the cast, and I counted that there are 3 Jews in the cast: Shylock, Tubal, and his daughter. There are 14 Venetians. So right there, 14 and 3, you have insider and you have outsider. There are 2 other suitors for Portia's hand. They disappear quickly. They have essentially 1 or 2 scenes in the play, and then they're gone. They are both also outsiders. One is a tawny Moor, and one is from Spain. Spain was, of course, Catholic. Catholics were outlawed in England as well. And Portia will comment about Morocco. He's the other suitor. Will comment disparagingly about his complexion. So the insiders are all white, all non-Jews, and they don't like Jews, and they don't like non-English people. That's one of the things that unites them. Another thing that unites them is early in the play, the men in the play bait Shylock. It's one of the things they just do very, very, very easily. And it points to that this society of Venetians has a cohesion. everyone kind of thinks the same. Another thing about the Venetians is that they're very good speculators. They like to do that. They like to gamble. They have a sense of largesse. They have a sense of money. And that's kind of great for comic characters because they're positive and they're forward reaching, but they have money. Now, if you contrast this, first of all, with the cast list, you'll notice right away in the play, Shylock has not just his name and his profession, he has his religion. Shylock, it says, a Jewish moneylender. Then it says Antonio, a merchant. It doesn't say Antonio, a Christian merchant. So religion is being used as a way of saying someone is different. It's not about humanity, it's about we have differences in our religion and therefore we're different people. That's very, very important for how we characterize insiders and outsiders. Another thing about the Venetians is that they love the law, but they have a very particular love of the law. They see the law as protecting commercial interests. Now, look at Shylock. Aside from being, and he's really going to be one, look at how he functions. He, first of all, he has great emotional pain, and he talks about it constantly in the play. He also has an obsession with law, but of the literal interpretation of the law, of contracts, of what I am owed. And he trusts that he will be able to have a literal interpretation of the law. He also asserts dietary rules. He locks his home, Portia doesn't, and he locks his daughter up, Jessica. Portia's father doesn't. You even look at what Shylock does. He confronts the Venetian hypocrisy. He says, you all believe in fairness, but you have slaves. So Shylock is much more of an emotional force in the play. And although Shylock talks a lot about money and the value of money, he also gives a great emotional value of money. One of his most powerful sequences in the play is when he talks about that Jessica has eloped with a Christian and has taken the ring, the turquoise ring that his wife gave him, his dead wife gave him. And he doesn't say how much the ring is worth. He says, my wife gave that to me. So he has immense emotional power in the play. Thank you.
Fascinating, Jeffrey. I mean, you mentioned a number of things that hopefully we can continue to tease out. One of them is the kind of godlessness, if you will, of the Venetians in the play, that Antonio is not a Christian merchant, he is just a merchant. And
right.
It may not be a coincidence that he says at the top of the play, I know not why I am so sad. That there is a kind of melancholy or a kind of sadness. And Portia actually also says the same thing in her first scene, my body is weary of this world. Kate, what do you think about the answer to this question? And there's also a question from one of our viewers, from Barry, that I think may be interesting for you to think about. If all that glitters is not gold applies to the whole play, isn't it fair to say Portia is the villain and proves it by taking vengeance out upon Shylock? This would be faithful to Shakespeare's basic humanity and succeed where Marlowe's Jew of Malta fails. And there was another question asked before we went on the air. People are so eager. How much influence do you think Marlowe's The Jew of Malta had on Shakespeare's creation and characterization in The Merchant of Venice? You don't have to answer those right now, but I will come back to those. So Kate, please.
Oh, that's great. You know, thank you, Jeffrey. What a wonderful sort of way to start us off. I would add one more, that there's 3 women in the play, and not a majority. And it's interesting. I mean, yes, you know, Portia's father doesn't lock her up, but he does shackle her in an interesting way, in that the way to her inheritance is to follow this weird sort of Sleeping Beauty plan that he laid out. And that's the only way that she is to have any power in this world as well. So anyway, just to go on your themes that you already started with, it's really interesting thinking about, what does money give us if we don't have all of the rest of the things that make us the insider? Maybe money will be the way to get us there. Obviously, because I'm a woman, and also because I'm an actress, and because I play Portia, I think about this play a lot through the lens of gender. And I think that what I think is fascinating about Portia in particular, and to our listener Barry's point, I do think she's a kind of villain. And I think that it's very dangerous in productions to make her completely attractive and take out the claws from her. I think that she's in this moment that we are in, as I was rereading it this week, I was so struck by the things I'm grappling with myself as a white woman in this moment. I have a certain amount of privilege. I have a great deal of privilege, in fact. Portia is privilege incarnate in so many ways. She's so intelligent. She has access to so many, because of her money, so many ways to certainly help Bassanio later, when she says, well, it's fine, I'll pay him sixfolds. No, what's no big deal, right? We can solve problems like that when we got money. And, I remember our director, Darko, often referred to her as a kind of a Paris Hilton. But what does it mean to be an heiress, right? She has not come by this money because of her own work or her own contributions. She's inheriting it. She also, though, has a good deal of education and breeding and intelligence and heart also. So she's such an interesting character because she is sort of one of the harshest to Shylock, and yet is also at the same time a kind of a Christian angel in that final scene not final scene, but the final scene of Act 4 in the courtroom. It's interesting. I think that's one of the things that I think is particularly interesting when I look at all the women in the play, how Jessica goes from, she's sort of in some ways the biggest outsider of everyone, because she has no control over her life when she's with her father, and then seemingly no control over her life when she's with her husband, and is trying to find some way to do that. In our production, Nerissa was really interesting. In our production, Kristen Simon Marabate, who's an African-American actress, played Nerissa. And that was really interesting because that first scene, as you mentioned, Drew, my little body is aweary of this world, and we're talking about all these suitors and othering them for huge comedic effect when it went well. But the idea from there is that then there were these splits, particularly around when Morocco came, right? Because at the end of when Morocco leaves, and as Jeffrey mentioned, Portia has that moment where she has a problem with his complexion, but none of his complexion, wound me. So it was this great moment that we found by having Nerissa be a Black woman, then there's another othering, right? Because there's that moment where I've said this thing in front of her. That's all sort of in production, but I think it's an interesting thing to do with this play because there's lots of opportunities in production to find other communities in the other characters, which we did in ours, and I hope effectively.
And it feels very intentional on Shakespeare's part, the way he depicts the sort of what we would now call the intersectionality, where oppressed or outside defined groups end up discriminating against one another. It's not an accident that Portia, a woman, is the one who is sort of ultimately turns on Shylock. F. Murray, as Jeffrey was saying, Shylock seems to be the only really serious man or serious person in the play. I'm wondering, when you play the role, how do you approach him? Do you see him as an outsider or as an insider?
Well, Antonio was a pretty serious character too, but it's really very, we talk this way and we really intellectualize and we really examine and blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of words and it's very important, but finally it's the playing that we're talking about. That's really where Shakespeare shines, and we should really focus on that, because no matter what concepts you bring to it, if you can just focus on the words, if you can just remember the power of the language and say it as an American actor, that's what we brought to this, by the way. Very important that I make this clear. The Brits, I have many British friends and they're very good, but they have such a heavy and long history that they really give you the impression that they own Shakespeare. And that's definitely not true. The Russians believe that actually he was Russian and the Germans think he was German. The point is, he is truly universal. But I don't think the British like to really believe that and accept it. So that when we talk about outsiders, I happen to be Syrian descent, Syrian and Italian, first generation. And I've been regarded always as a Jew because my name is Abraham. So I hear anti-Arab jokes. And when they find out I'm Syrian, they begin to tell me anti-Jewish jokes. So it's a double outsider effect. But let me finish my point about playing the outsider. First of all, it's easy if you really, as a good actor, as a thoughtful actor, if you focus on being, on what it was like to be, go through puberty, everybody knows what it feels like to be an outsider. That's what you are. But when you don't expand that experience of being an outsider and include everyone else, all of humanity, that's what begins to separate. And I think that that idea of the other is cherished by many groups. Jews like to call themselves the chosen people, but then every religion says the same thing. They're all the chosen, and they like to separate and identify with certain other people in their same clan. Well, when we got to Stratford-on-Avon, it was the RSC had gathered companies from all over the world to do all of Shakespeare in 1 year. And we were invited to do The Merchant of Venice. And to go as a group of Americans into Shakespeare's backyard was definitely an other feeling. At least that's what I felt. So that when we presented our idea of an American accent in this great play, with one of the greatest parts I think ever written, the word spread very quickly. There were people from all over the world to see this 1 year of Shakespeare. So it was after the first performance that we gave, the audience rose, which was very rare, I'm told. And I was living across the street from the Swan at the time. And that morning I looked out and there was a queue outside the door to get tickets to our show. What I'm trying to say is we triumphed as outsiders. And I think that was reflective of so much of what's happening in the streets, not only here in New York, but this whole protest movement all over the world is an example of those others and people who support the others rising up and making a statement. I don't want to carry on this. I've already talked too much, but I will say one more thing, and I promise I'll be quiet. I would give anything to play Shylock again. If you don't have a Shylock, I'm doing a series now, but I'll break that contract. Anyway, thank you very much. And I would like to mention that in preparation for doing this play in New York City, which has more Jews than there are in Tel Aviv, for your information, you should really discuss this with my dear Jeffrey, because he did a lot of preparation, a lot of you can talk about it if you want to, Jeffrey, but it was a brilliant idea. He brought in the Jewish community.
Simon, you are our resident Brit that maybe F. Murray might have been talking about. Lay ownership to Shakespeare. Would you care to respond to this, I think, provocation about who owns Shakespeare?
I'm the gauntlet's been thrown down, Murray. Thank you. Well, I mean, all I can say that the tables have been reversed, at least in Shakespearean terms, because of course I am now the Brit in America. So trying to find my way through your extraordinary country and actually and absolutely enjoying. In fact, I mean, you're right, Murray, that in terms of Shakespeare, it is liberating to be here in this country because one is not burdened by history in the way that one can feel in England, as if there is somehow a tradition and a way of doing things which is always going to get in the way of real discovery and real creativity and real freedom. And I think as artists, that's the things that we should be prizing most. So I think all the world's a stage, and we're all allowed to tread on it.
Simon, while I have you, would you care to update our audience on the news that we have about the Shakespeare Hour going forward?
Yes, well, thank you, Drew, for a great segue. Well, it's great to have so many people with us this evening, and indeed, I'm pleased to say that the appetite is growing. So due to popular demand, we are going to extend Shakespeare Hour Live through to the end of July. And rather than specific plays, we're actually going to move on in July to talking about themes related to his life and work. And here they are. We're going to try and show you a graphic about the episodes that are coming up. I don't know whether we're going to manage it, but yes, I think we have. Good. And of course, Shakespeare Hour Live is supported by the Phoenix Fund, which is the campaign to keep classical theatre alive and well in America and in Washington, D.C., which many of you have donated to. And if you're moved by these conversations and excited to see more of them, please feel free to make a donation via our website to the Phoenix Fund to bring more Shakespeare into your life. Thank you. Back to you, Drew.
I know I want to get some of the passages from Shakespeare that I'm really eager to hear, which may anchor our conversation a little bit more, but we also have a flood of questions that have come in. So I'm going to read some of them and we can answer the ones that seem particularly provocative. A question from Simon, not, I assume, Simon Godwin. Is Portia also an outsider as a woman powerless to her decisions of marriage? I think, Kate, you were referencing this. And a woman who has to dress as a man. Don't forget, she goes in disguise in Act 4 in order to participate in the legal world of Venice. Also from Simon, Portia speaks eloquently about mercy, but does not show mercy after winning the case. What's more, she makes questionable decisions to put her husband's love and loyalty to the test. Was the talk of mercy just that? Was it all talk? Two more questions, one from James. Did Shakespeare mean to portray Portia as a villain? Or is that, as I found out when I played her, presumably in all-male production, James, that she was anti-Semitic as part of the society she was living in? In other words, are all Venetians just uniformly prejudiced? And a question from John, who I think seems to be a bit of an originalist when it comes to Shakespeare. This conversation seems to be an effort to rationalize the play in modern eyes. Why not simply see the play as reflective of the views of Jews/Shakespeare at the time? Does anyone care to answer one of those questions?
Oh, Jesus.
I love that response, Murray. Well, to that last question, this is maybe because I'm speaking as an actor, and I will always speak as an actor. We are doing plays now. We are doing plays now, so they must be for audiences now. And next year we will do plays for audiences that are next year, and we don't know what those audiences will be yet, because especially right now, it feels like everything's changing so quickly, right? Every month we have a different lens to see things through. So you know, I suppose it's an interesting thought experiment to think about a play and to understand the context, certainly, as Jeffrey was saying before, that it's important to understand the context in which something is written. But ultimately, it's a living, breathing thing once you put it on the stage, and it is for that moment and that moment only.
And also, in terms of context, there were no Jews in England for hundreds of years during the time that Shakespeare was writing the play. So Shakespeare was writing the play on some level, and Jeffrey, you were saying this as a fairy tale. Antonio borrowing money from Shylock is completely ludicrous. You could have gotten insurance at the time Shakespeare was writing if you were going to finance a venture in the way Antonio was. So Shakespeare was not writing a work of social realism. He was writing a kind of parable or a moral folktale, fairy tale. Do we have passages from Shakespeare that we want to read as more present?
Didn't Johnson say that his plays were for all time? I mean, it's true, absolutely. But what he's
sorry, Marty,
go ahead.
I was going to say also to the question, to the observation, as an apology for Shakespeare. We don't know what Shakespeare built into his plays were questions. That's what makes his plays inexhaustible. He doesn't answer his questions. He builds into this play. Is it an anti-Semitic play? Is it a play about anti-Semitism? That's built into the structure of the play. And that's part of it, why it's inexhaustible. And we keep coming back to it. As Kate says, you're always doing it in the moment. How are those questions resonating right now is what makes it alive.
And we did see this last week too. There were a number of questions about Othello trying to find out that there was no racism in the play, as if it was an attempt to deny the fact that Shakespeare could be writing about something that's still part of our present day society. When I think what we've learned from last week, this week, and indeed from all 9 weeks of the Shakespeare Hour, is that Shakespeare was writing about our world, our early modern world, and that there is no such fabled mythical thing as Shakespeare's time when everything was different. You can draw a straight line from his world to our world. F. Murray, did you prepare a passage of Shakespearean verse for tonight?
Oh, yeah, well, I love him so much, and it's the famous speech, you know, that his has not a Jew or eyes, it's famous, but his appeal in court in Act 4 is brilliant also. But to bait fish withal, if it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He has disgraced me. Anyway, it goes on. But when I deliver it, I want it to be from his guts. I want it to be not a soft thing. It's an explosion. It's Mount Vesuvius with a Jewish accent. You know, I was invited to go to do this speech and a couple of others for the 500th anniversary of the ghetto in Venice. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was there. And I asked her if she would play the chief magistrate in what we presented as an appeal by Shakespeare, by Shylock. And there were real lawyers who argued the case. And in the end, Shylock won. And the first thing that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said was that Portia couldn't practice law because she didn't have a degree. Anyway, it was a great moment. But Shakespeare won, and I have the appeal. Anyhow, I'm not going to do more. I could do a lot.
Come on, Murray, do us a bit more. Come on, do us a bit more. I'm on the edge of my seat here. Come on, we want Vesuvius.
Come on, Murray.
You have disgraced me. Oh, God. Oh, gosh. I'm looking at my friend Jeffrey, and I'm seeing him. Jeffrey, say something nice.
I said it's fantastic. Go on. Go on. It's wonderful.
It hindered me. Oh, gosh. Scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies. And what is his reason? I am a Jew. I've got a Jew eyes. I've got a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, affections, passions, senses. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we shall resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his response be? Why? Revenge. The villainy you teach me. I will answer, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction. I paraphrased a few, sorry.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
I stopped breathing, I think, for a second. It was so powerful. Wow. And what's so interesting is that you mentioned, I think everyone thinks that comes in the trial scene in Act 4, but it comes in Act 3, before the trial scene, when they're trying to persuade Shylock not to demand his bond in court, which I think is very, again, there's nothing accidental or unintentional in Shakespeare. Kate, do you have a passage of Shakespeare for us to hear?
Well, it's so fun. I mean, again, it's the famous one, but I feel like we have to hear the quality of mercy, which was really hard to reread this week for me. Which I'll talk about afterwards, but and I was having such a moment watching you, Marie, and I just had this memory of being on that stage with you and looking into your beautiful face and saying this to you every night. I love it. The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power doth then show likest God's, when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do pray for mercy, and that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. And then she goes on about back into the plot of the play and what to do with all of that. But I find it so troubling how justice is talked about in this play, especially right now. And how, you know, it's so double-edged. I think it's a really beautiful offer to him. It's a beautiful gift. And the way I feel like we had in our production, it was kind of a moment where maybe there was a seed of hope. Maybe there was a seed of coming together, being in the same place. But all my language is New Testament language. She's not coming to him understanding where he's coming from. She's coming to him saying, our way is better. I'll show you, I'll save you. And it's such a kind of gentle violence. Anyway.
Of course, exactly. You're right, Kate. I think one of the swerves that Shakespeare so enjoys, going back to the conversation we're having about why is Shakespeare a great dramatist, is that you say these astonishing words. And of course, Shylock says, pass. No, I don't accept it. The money was not paid. The agreement was, if the money was not paid back to me by this date, I will take a pound of flesh. And it's astonishing, Shakespeare's love of high stakes, because as I was rereading the play for tonight, I was once again amazed. Part two, Shylock takes out a knife to cut out a pound of flesh from the man who has not been able to pay as agreed. And I think what's extraordinary is this, and if I may just respond further to Kate's point, is that I was looking up this line from St. Paul, the letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. Now, of course, Portia appeals to the spirit, and Shylock refers to the letter of the law. And then, of course, Shakespeare does another extraordinary swerve and says, and gets Portia to brilliantly find a flaw in the letter of the law, because, of course, she then goes on to say, well, you've asked for a pound of flesh, but tarry a little, there is something else. This bond doth give me here no jot of blood. The words expressly are a pound of flesh. Take then thy bond, shed thou no blood, nor cut thou less nor more, but just a pound of flesh. And Shylock realizes that there's no way he's going to be able to cut a pound of flesh without shedding a drop of blood. So one position reversed, changed, altered, and the audacity of these characters' intelligence, I think, never fails to amaze us.
You mentioned a pound of flesh, and I came across this while reading, but Jim Shapiro, who was our guest a couple of weeks ago, has a brilliant book on Shakespeare and the Jews, and he argues that that is a reference to circumcision of all things, and that Shylock is asking for Antonio to be forcibly converted into a Jew, which I think is a novel thesis, certainly. Jeffrey, you were mentioning that you also had a passage that you wanted to hold in reserve for the second half of the show.
I just want to, yes, I do. I just want to say a couple of things. First, to give a shout out to Kate. This was the second time we had done The Merchant of Venice. Kate did it on a national tour. We did it in New York and Stratford, and then on a national tour. And Kate did it, the national tour was 4 years after we had done it in Stratford. She won, I must say this, she won the Elliot Norton Award in Boston. It was a performance that was both, and this is what I want to say about what she just did and what Simon is talking about. In the moment, you do believe in mercy, but it's what comes after that that's so unmerciful. And that's another swerve that Shakespeare does. Because if she just said, look, I've proven it wrong, all right, let's all shake hands and go home, but she doesn't. And you're going back to the insider and the outsider. He's stripped of everything. He loses his daughter. He loses his religion. His home is taken. That's not mercy. That's like the policeman shooting in the back. It's not necessary. So he's so great, Shakespeare, because you're with the character, and then it's what comes after is very powerful. Another thing I just want to say before I read my little passage is, when we first did it, and Murray referred to this, the Theater for New Audience programmed three plays all exploring the Jewish stereotype. Murray played Shylock in Merchant of Venice and Barabbas in The Jew of Malta in repertory. Those two plays have never been done in repertory since in America. The third play we did was Oliver Twist, an adaptation of Oliver Twist and Fagin. So we had to actually go to the Anti-Defamation League before we put these plays on and talk about, well, what were we doing by putting on these plays? So the plays are always controversial. I was once an actor, or certainly Merchant. I was once an actor, and I was in a play by Arnold Wesker. Sir Arnold Wesker now, a brilliant Jewish dramatist who's passed, he wrote a play called Shylock, which says that Shakespeare's play is anti-Semitic and reinterprets it from Wesker, who was Jewish, saying this is what a Jew would write about this play. That play has actually never been done in London. It's been done outside of London in other countries. So the play is absolutely controversial. And it had to have been controversial when Shakespeare wrote it, because for God's sakes, not only were Jews outlawed, but Lopez, Elizabeth's physician, was accused of being Jewish, hung and quartered. His corpse, it was out in the public. Now, the passage I have is talking about that, how we have these very powerful feelings about each other and justice and what's fair. And the couple, Lorenzo and Jessica, are finally married, and they have there's the famous beautiful lines, how sweet the moonlight sleeps upon this bank. Here will we sit and let the sounds of music creep in our ears. Soft stillness in the night become the touches of sweet harmony. Sit, Jessica, look how the floor of heaven is thick inlaid with patterns of bright gold. There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdst, but in his motion like an angel sings, still choiring in the young-eyed cherubim. Such harmony is in immortal souls. But whilst this muddy vesture of decay doth grossly close it in, we cannot hear it. And Jessica says, I'm never merry when I hear sweet music. That's the honeymoon. So, and it's the interfaith marriage. Astonishing piece of writing about how we're locked out of heaven because of our humanity. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, Act 5, it's a very mysterious playwriting move that Shakespeare makes, where he resolves the Shylock story. Shylock is stripped and bereft and exits. And it's not like Malvolio at the end of Twelfth Night.
Right.
There's a whole other really miniature play that unfolds in Belmont. And as you say, Jeffrey, it is it's some of the most beautiful poetry in the canon, but it's also very sad somehow.
Yeah, because they can't actually hear it. They can't hear the music of the spheres. We don't hear it. We can't. We can only imagine it. It's an extraordinary statement.
And it feels like the play comes full circle, where everyone is sad at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then this drama with Shylock kind of brings everybody into contact with one another, and differences are debated, contested. And then we end the play in a kind of sadness. So it's
called a comedy.
At the beginning, it has the shape of a comedy, but it's not funny at all.
I wonder.
It has the comedic ending, but yeah.
I wonder
the
whether
content's something else.
Before we have some final questions, I'm sure, but Murray, whether you might speak about the feeling at the end of Shylock's journey. I mean, he is, as it were, humiliated and has to relinquish his claim and is forced to convert and to become a Christian, and is forced to give up some of his money. And how did it feel? Let's talk about feelings. I mean, in that moment was it despair? Was it anger? What was your memory of that?
That last line it still remains the most difficult line. I never solved it really. I am content. But my agony happened actually before my exit, when they stripped my yarmulke off. It was, for me, that was like cutting off, like scalping me. It was a horrifying moment. But that was for me as deep into the abyss as he could go. And after that, it was all. I still don't know how to say that line. I am content. It was difficult, of course, but I screamed when I walked off the stage. But we shouldn't leave. I know there's not much time left. The use of the word blood throughout that fourth act is really very telling, because it has very complexly involved in the Christian idea at that time that the blood of children was used to make matzahs. But blood comes up over and over and over again. It's definitely an anti-Semitic play. And I believe if you cut off those cut out those anti-Semitic references, you're doing Shakespeare a great injustice, because the more you hammer at it and more you show that society for the kind of anti-Semitic bastards they were, I think the more sympathy you finally end up with for
right. The insiders become the awful people.
Yeah.
I also just want to give out another shout out that The Merchant of Venice was directed by Darko Dresniak. And Darko is a brilliant director, lives in America now, but Darko was born in Yugoslavia, and he emigrated to America right before the war broke out. Darko is extremely aware of these kinds of violent religious cultural conflicts, and he brought great understanding to this play.
Some more questions just in the few minutes we have left. One for Kate from Shelley, or Shellen. Kate was actually making a very different point, which everyone has ignored. So I apologize, Kate, if we are ignoring your point. Portia is not even showing mercy to Shylock in the quality of mercy speech. She is offering him Christian salvation, which I think is interesting. One for F. Murray. Last week we talked about the noble outsider in Othello. This week we're talking about a dastardly outsider. What do you think Shakespeare is saying about Shylock? Is he evil? And one for Jeffrey. Shoot, I'm trying to find it. Do you think that Shakespeare demonstrates his own anti-Semitism in the play? Let's go Kate, F. Murray, and Jeffrey.
I will answer very quickly, because I think what's interesting about that is that it's a double-edged offer. I think that Portia is offering true mercy. She believes she's offering true mercy, but it's a kind of it's a Christian savior idea. It's not mercy on Shylock's terms. It's mercy on the Venetian terms. It's mercy on her terms, which is she thinks a kind of mercy, but is not actually a kind of mercy.
Right, it's a kind of violence, actually. Right. F. Murray.
Shylock is not dastardly, first of all. But the other thing is that he and Portia are the smartest people in the play. And I love his wit. I love his comedy, his sense of humor. In the face of this horrible society that he's forced to live in, I think his humor is his salvation. That was a big tragedy for me, was when he finally completely lost his sense of humor, his sense of proportion, his sense of justice. Revenge took over. And that was the tragedy of this character. But I would never call him a villain. Never.
The first time we see him, he says Antonio is a good man, and then he immediately specifies what that means. I mean, he's good for his money.
Well, there's a way, yeah, exactly. But a real villain is Barabbas. I mean, now we're talking.
Right, he's not a murderer of children at all.
No.
He's a father and a widower. Jeffrey.
If anti-Semitism means a belief that Jews are evil, etc., absolutely not. Shakespeare's not demonstrating anti-Semitism. He's writing, I believe he's writing about anti-Semitism, but even saying that is reductive. The extraordinary thing about Shakespeare is you don't know where he identifies. He's able to bring to life multiple points of views and questions. And I think it's reductive to say, is Shakespeare an anti-Semite? That's impossible to say. You could look at the play as an audience member and say, this is what it makes me feel. I'm sure that's what he would like. Someone else will see it differently. That's the extraordinary thing about Shakespeare. You can't reduce it.
And his characters as well, that they change.
You can't reduce his characters, exactly, you can't. And of course he's not dastardly. He's a human being, Shylock, and he's enraged. And he's justifiably enraged. That's not dastardly.
I think we keep on coming to the same kind of, not banal conclusion, but I think incredibly rich, deep, mysterious conclusion about Shakespeare, which is that he is amorally interested in the human condition. He's not interested in imposing his morality. He's interested in studying morality. He's not interested in forwarding an anti-Semitic interpretation. He's interested in understanding anti-Semitism. If that is, if we could even call it anti-Semitism or not something much, much, much bigger and nameless, wordless. Simon, which is the merchant and which is the Jew in this play? I think it's...
Actually, before I answer that, and that of course is a wonderful line from the play, which is an extraordinary moment when Portia walks into the trial and says that very line, which is the merchant here and which is the Jew, which sums up everything that we're saying, I think, so brilliantly. And not least, of course, the merchant of Venice, we think is Shylock, just in our minds, but we realize it's not, it's Antonio. So this is another one of his games, his tricks. His games and his tricks, I think, are to do with his swerves, his surprises are to do, I think, with a moral awakening that he's trying to bring us to, which is not to sit in any one easy view, but to somehow acquire a sprightliness of mind that allows us to be flexible, to empathize, to, as I always say to actors on the first day of rehearsal, hold on tightly, let go lightly. But I want to hand over to Murray, because I know he wanted to also speak to that point.
You said it, man. Terrific.
All right.
I also say what's one other thing, because I did say this when we were doing the play. For Shakespeare to have written in 1596 or 98, to give Shylock the words, hath not a Jew eyes, to talk about the idea that a Jew is as human as a Christian, that we're all humans, that's a revolutionary thing to say. He said that when it was illegal to be a Jew. And he said it when there had just been the execution of Lopez. That's not anti-Semitism.
Well, I think that, we're living in possibly revolutionary times. And I think that's a wonderful note to end on, that Shakespeare, underneath it all, he's forwarding this revolutionary notion of what it means to be a human being. So please join us next week for something very different. We're going to discuss the tyrant's descent from power with Richard III. Our guests include Hester Lees Jeffries, Chuck Iwuji, and Greg Mazgala. And good night, everyone. Good night, Simon.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. It was great. Bye.
Jeffrey, to Kate, Murray.
Bye. Thank you for having us.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.